Hello, I'm Ben. Today we're going to be chatting with Diogo Coutinho.
Hello, everyone.
Diogo is head of product at Shell Digital Hub. He has extensive experience with product management and with products in multiple companies.
Happy to be here.
From a product's perspective, how do you think about value?
Well, I like to break down value into two parts. So business value and user value, right? So when you're running a business, you generally have a user base, a user target that you're trying to serve. So when you go and work on an initiative like a product, you're looking to add value to those users, to those customers, and as a result, you're looking to generate business value. So as a product person, I think you have to constantly have those two in mind, and it will vary depending on the size of the company, right? So if you are a startup and you're just starting on that initiative that you're trying to do, it's much more helpful to always start with the customer, start with the user value first. So you every effort that you're making, you're trying to serve your customer, solve problems for your customer, and then as a result, you have to then have the commercial mindset, the business mindset, to turn that into business value. So now that I've tackled problems 1, 2, and 3 from this customer, and they are giving me signals that they're getting value from that product, from that proposition. How can I then turn that into business value? And maybe that is monetizing one of those 3 features, right, in a clever way that the customer finds that it's still worth paying for that because they can see clearly the value that is providing to them. So that is a good distinction to always have in your mind between business value and user value.
Right. Okay. And it's funny because from my perspective, and I'm actually from the perspective of a software engineer, for me, it's quite essential to actually think about the value that I will deliver in the product that I build. And because ultimately, this is very much the way you can differentiate between a more senior and a more junior engineer. A senior person will actually know the amount of time required to use particular features, particular tools. They will also know what's the impact from a performance perspective in designing the solution in a particular way. And so they will actually make decisions not solely based on performances, but actual value that it's delivering for a product. So it's very important, I'd say, when you're an engineer building a product, to constantly think about this value perspective. And I'd say the people who are best at being a software engineer will be the ones who are best at estimating and evaluating the actual impact of certain design decisions that they make on the product. And when you think about a product team, and I'd say I've seen basically two big types of products. One of them is where the team has ownership of the value of the product, and they're able to make decisions based on the output, on the value and the commercial output of this of the decisions. And the other case is when teams are focused on actual feature delivery. So rather than owning the value, they have to deliver a set of features, and they might not have complete visibility of the impacts of the decisions. What do you make out of this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In many cases, there are people in the organization that will feel like they own that upper level of business strategy and the value work stream. Let's call it that. So they interact, they end up operating like a proxy, or they maintain that visibility just to themselves, and then they feel like, well, I understand what the business needs, and it needs feature A, B, and C, right? And then that filters that down to the team as just a list of features to deliver. So you don't connect the mindset of the team members, the product team members, to the upper level, which is the level of what are the needles that need to be moved for the business to thrive and for our users to thrive, right? So if you don't empower the team to connect at that level, first of all, they'll feel demotivated just getting a list of things to do. And second, they won't really understand what is the purpose of their work.
So I understand this, but in a sense, do you think there are actual motivations for companies to behave like this? Or is it just something they're inheriting from old habits?
I think it's more of the latter. I think it's more inherited from previous experiences or historic experiences they had in the previous years or decades, right? So we have to admit that, you know, truly products-led organizations are not something that have been around for several decades. It's maybe been around for 1 or 2 decades, and the various companies are trying to evolve and adapt that thinking. So there's a great deal of education that has to be done for those people to learn how to operate in this new model. In the model being empower teams, give autonomy, extreme alignment at all levels, right? Not just at the more granular feature level, but also at the strategic level. When you connect the strategic level directly to your product teams, that's when you have the magic, right?
So can you elaborate a bit more on this, on what you said around extreme alignment?
Yeah, sure. So that alignment can be delivered in a few ways. That extreme alignment means the product teams understand how their product deliverables connect to the overall mission and vision of the company, ideally of the company, right? So depending on the size of the company, some companies are so large that, you know, just connecting your work to the vision of the department or the vision of that product line, it's also a great achievement. So the way you do that is by, you know, going step by step in the chain from, okay, this company has this mission, or this, let's start with this vision, which is really the painting the picture of what you want the future to look like after you deliver on your mission, right? Which is what you do as a company on the day-to-day for a long time to get to that point in time in future, which is your vision. And then from vision and mission, you get down to, okay, what in the next 12 months, 18 months is going to be your strategy to get closer to that vision, right? You may not get there in 18 months, but what is basically during this period our strategic pillars, or the ways we're going to operate in this market, in this sector, that is going to get us there. So as you've written that down, okay, what does that mean in terms of the objectives that this area or this team should have to reach that goal? And then what are the results, what are the metrics that will tell you if you're achieving those objectives? So you're kind of tying everything up level by level, all the way to the feature level, because then you can say, okay, in order to achieve this result, this metric, to move this metric from 30% to 50%, the team believes that we should build this, right? The team believes that we should optimize that process. And that's a very empowering thing to have, because the team is creating their own roadmap. The team is creating their own backlog of features, because they already know that what the business leaders and what the executive team cares about is to move that metric from 30 to 50, which will mean that they hit those objectives, which will mean they're achieving that mission. So everything is nicely tied to each other throughout those levels. And what I just quoted was basically, if you didn't realize, is the OKR framework, right? So a lot of people will be familiar with this these days. So objectives and key results. So how do you write a set of objectives for the quarter or for the year, and how you then write a few measurable results that will tell you at the end of that quarter whether you got closer to that objective or not.
It definitely has to be a top-down process.
Yes, that's right. So the leadership team needs to show that they care about a framework like OKRs, right? They need to show that they are bought into that process, that they are passionate about having well-written, well-thought-of objectives, well-thought-of metrics, and they have to show that they care on a regular basis to even keep track of it, because that's the way that the team also gets motivated to work on those. If your leaders are not paying attention to whether the KPI is moving in the right direction or not, because they're perhaps involved in higher level discussions, politics, or other problems are taking their mind, then they're not going to feel motivated to pursue those metrics.
Yeah, and I'd say actually from my perspective, we mentioned leadership team, but I think what we really want is for this to align to the commercial objectives of a company. And even if we feel that it's too difficult to implement it, especially within a large corporation, at least having the commercial objectives of one independent department would enable this department to implement this within their own internal structure, because that way they know exactly how it impacts the bottom line. Whereas if it's a department which doesn't have any actual commercial objective, which is just here as support for the rest of the organization, it's much harder to define those.
Yeah, that's right. So in a lot of cases, you will have products which are internal, right? So they're called normally just internal products. They are still considered products because they have an audience, they have a user base, but those users might be internal employees, which are your sales managers, your analysts, or your marketing managers, which are using those products in order to drive those commercial goals that you just mentioned. So it's important for us and leaders in the space to never stop at the level of the user there. Like you said in the beginning, it's all about saving time for that particular user, right? It's going to make their workflow faster. Yeah, right, sure, but what is that going to make them achieve for the business? So if that marketing manager suddenly has 50% more time, can they bring a lot more business to the company as a result? And how can you even have ways to measure that, or to show that to the underlying team that's working on that internal product?
Yeah, the example I quite like to take that I mentioned to you previously is the idea of an email. So imagine a company selling a particular kind of product, and in order to sell this, they have to send emails. I mean, everyone needs to send emails as part of our normal process. And the amount of time they take to send emails is about 1 minute. But imagine that you develop a feature which enables them to reduce this time from 1 minute to 45 seconds. Is this going to impact the amount of business that you make? Is it going to increase your margins? And actually, well, that's a relevant question, because it might, but actually, I'd say in most cases it won't really have an impact.
Yeah, it's also important for the leaders of those product teams to be connected at that level with the leaders of these other functions which are using the product. So the marketing leader in that case, or the sales leader in that case, which are the users of that product, to understand the impact that it has had on their departments, right? And relate that to the team as previously mentioned. But it won't always mean a gain in productivity unless it's followed up thoroughly, right, throughout the chain.
So Another question also I was thinking about, and this is actually a mistake that I often, well, it's something that I often see in product teams, especially when they're a bit less mature. But I often see them defining objectives and KPIs, and as part of one of the objectives is to actually define KPIs. So it's a bit of an inception, as in the objective is to define an objective. And I wonder, what is kind of your take on this?
I've never seen an objective in the teams I worked on to be defining other objectives, but I get why you could be there. So it's an important step to know whether you're getting closer to your goal or not, right? So if you don't know, if you're not measuring the progress of your work, if you're not measuring whether you're achieving the goals you want to achieve, there's really no point in progressing, right? You're just trying out random things, and you're shooting all different directions. So I guess that's why this tends to happen. It's a very important initial step to have it covered before you even do things. I was always of the opinion of, no feature should really be released if you don't have a way of measuring the impact of it, right? If you cannot anticipate how or through which mechanism you're gonna know if the features is working well or not, then it's just a tick box exercise, right? So that's why, it starts with setting up the metrics, it starts with setting up objectives before you do anything.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are also a bit wary, and say people might be a bit scared to spend too much time trying to measure this value, and they might think that it's effort for no real reason.
Yeah, that is definitely a historical challenge or concern, which is not always, which doesn't always reflect the reality. These days, the tooling for measuring products has improved a lot in recent years. Also, in the sense that it's become easier and easier to add them, to install them, to have them up and running in a matter of an hour, 2 hours, right? You know yourself how these days you can install them and have them running, because the availability of APIs improved, the availability of documentation. The documentation is so much better than it used to be. So it's making it easier and easier for development teams to have that inserted, to a point where it's taking more time these days for the product teams to debate between themselves what the objective should be or what the metric should be, than to actually add the tracking and start measuring, right? So I think things have flipped over time, but that's perhaps not general knowledge yet, but it's what's been happening.
Right. And I'd say, going back to the current economic context, so I mean, we're going through, well, an economic crisis. A lot of companies are cutting the fat. They're trying to really focus on cash flow. What is your take on this? How do you think companies should actually interpret this, and how do you think they should invest?
So this comes down to analyzing the portfolios, the products, the initiatives that companies have at the moment, and really seeing what's going to be paying off in the short term compared to the long term, right? So through your strategic objectives, through your thinking in the product teams, you will be able to know which initiatives are due to pay dividends in the short term, with regards to whether there's a financial benefit that is goes straight to the cash flow, or it's a financial benefit that gets realized a little bit later, but it gets the confidence of your investors up in just enough for you to continue to operate that initiative, or even the company itself. So it is the time to unfortunately be more short-term focused, and without losing sight of the bigger picture, right? So that's the danger as well. The bigger picture, the big transformation or the big initiatives that you have across, which are more like 1, 2, 5 years down the line, get heavily affected by that. And they will get affected to a certain extent for sure. But it's having the ability to zoom in and out of that situation to protect the short term without completely compromising the long term. This phase will end, right? Things will get better. It might take longer than people imagine, and it might take less, but this phase will pass. So my point being, whoever comes out of this phase the stronger, it's gonna make it's gonna win big. So, and what my point I'm making is, if you completely forget innovation or deprioritize innovation, it's gonna make it harder for you to come out of this phase at 100 miles an hour, right? So you're gonna have to spin your wheel a few times, as opposed to other competitors that might be, still prioritizing the short term, but keeping an eye on, keeping that in the back burner. So as soon as they see a window of opportunity, they can continue with on that innovation path that they were following. So I think that's very important to bear in mind. So protecting the short term, but also having like that competitiveness view of things, of how do I come out of this phase the fastest and strongest as possible.
From my perspective, the best way to incentivize innovation within an organization is to have teams focused on values rather than just features, because that really enables team to have this bottom-up process where each member of the team has ownership of the product and of what it becomes.
Yeah, and you will have in many occasions, engineers and designers seeing pockets of opportunity that the people in the leadership couldn't possibly have seen it, right? And because they've been empowered to see the bigger picture and know where they can make an impact, they will be able in their domains to see those opportunities with little bits of improvement, little bits of innovation that they can drive, which would otherwise have been obscure to them if you hadn't show them what really makes an impact for that company in that particular moment in time.
So if you have a team which is trying to deliver value and is trying to focus on one of the objectives, how would you advise them to break down the value, and how would you do it yourself?
Yeah, when you think about value, you can really think about it from a value proposition perspective. So there are things like value proposition canvas, which is a tool, it's available online for a number of ways, which tries to break down value as things like in 3 parts actually, if I remember correctly. One is painkiller, enhancer, or job to be done. So almost anything that delivers value, you can kind of slot into one of those 3, right? So it's either trying to alleviate pain or problem. It's either maybe there is no pain, but it's something that's still going to enhance your day-to-day, or there's just a job that you needed to get done, and that product does it for you. So this is a way that the value proposition canvas does it. I find it sometimes a little bit ambiguous when I try to apply that. So you end up putting it into multiple categories. So I found a more simplified way of breaking down value in my mind to see it as either a problem or an opportunity, right? And these days you see a lot of the guidance saying, oh, always start with the problem. What is the user problem? What is the user problem? But I think people forget that there's also sometimes not an obvious problem, but there's an opportunity, right? There's something sitting there waiting to be grabbed by someone, and maybe it's a pot of money. It's some opportunity to drive value that you just have to go after, and no one's screaming about it because it's not causing a particular pain to a particular user. So I try to break it down into problems and opportunities.
Well, thank you very much, Diogo, for your time and for those insights.
You're welcome. Very happy to be here. Thanks, Ben.
Cheers.
Cheers.